Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, Atlanta. How are you this beautiful, beautiful morning? I want to welcome you to Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I am your host, Dr. Angela Chester. Daily Spark, yep, we enlighten, inspire, and empower you to become your best self. The tongue is a small thing that makes grand speeches, but a tiny spark can set a great forest on fire. And that's what I want to do today. Get you fired up about this week. Well, we are talking from farmer to shepherd. I know. I love that title too. Our guest today is Remy Diederich, and he is an author and a pastor, and he is coming out of the Menominee, Wisconsin area. And we are going to really pick his brain about what is it like to not only be a pastor, but to be an author, and how do the two go together, and how do you live out your purpose in both aspects. Well, let me tell you just a little bit more about him. Remy grew up in Bloomington, Minnesota, and graduated from the University of Minnesota, where he met his wife. They became followers of Jesus in college. He had a bad church experience, and he kind of walked away from church for just a while, but then he moved into a community of other Christians in rural Wisconsin. Well, that had its problems too, but of course God always knows what he's doing. So he decided to re-enter the church and decided to quit complaining and become a part of the solution. Well, Remy is the founding pastor of Cedar Brook Church, and he's also authored 6 books that serve as the spiritual advisor for Arbor Place Treatment Center, as well as he coaches pastors in the Evangelical Covenant Church. He is married and has 3 adult children. So without any further ado, let's bring Pastor on the line. Hello, Remy. How are you? Thank you so much for joining me today.
Angela, it's good to be here. It's fun to talk to you.
Thank you so much. Now, I love the title From Farmer to Shepherd. I have done some talks myself on being the good shepherd and what that means. So I'm so excited to talk to you about the various roles that you play. So when we talk about farmer and shepherd, how did you come about your faith, and what was your initial faith walk like?
Man, it's been so varied, but I grew up in a very traditional Catholic background, and so it's I know there's a lot of God-loving Catholics, but in my family it wasn't that way. We just went to church because that's what we were supposed to do. And when like many people, when I went through confirmation, that was our exit of the church. And so I was unchurched probably from the time I was 10 years old until I was in college. And so, I believed in God. I got that much from church, but I really didn't see God as personal. And it wasn't until I met someone, it was a girl that I dated in college, that she was, surprisingly, she was the first person that I ever met that acknowledged that she was she was a confessing Christian, read the Bible, went to church, and loved Jesus. Never met a person like that before, and it really affected me. It changed me and made me want to seek out what she had.
And isn't it really interesting how a person can change your life for the better or for the worse, and just by who they are and how they interact with us? That's really interesting.
Yeah, Jesus said that there are people that are ripe for harvest, and I was one of those people. I was just ready to come to faith, and I just needed to encounter someone that had faith that could show me the road. So I came to faith in college, and I started to go to church, and I went to a charismatic church in Minneapolis. At the time, it was one of the fastest-growing churches in the country, and a very exciting place to be. And then I got involved in a church plant out of that church that was also fun and exciting. That's where I kind of cut my teeth in ministry, just in a very organic way. But both of those churches had their own downside, and I would say in their own way they were spiritually abusive, and it just turned both myself and my wife sour on the church. It was just like, wow, this is church. We believe in Jesus, we love God, but the church, we don't know if this is an organization that's going to be good for us. Maybe through the years it's just kind of gone sour, and we need to be more like meeting in homes and something more on an organic level. So that's the turn that we took many, many years ago when we were in our 20s.
It's so wonderful that you were both on the same page with that. That, one of you weren't saying, oh, but this is the place that I really love, and the other person was discontented. It's really nice that you both felt the same way about the experience, and then it allowed you to be able to move on together as a couple, as opposed to, one person going one way and the other person going another.
Yeah, we've often talked about that. We've often talked about how, because we've gone through some extreme things in the church, we've always stepped right together in these things, and we've been able to move, together. We're very grateful that God has allowed us to do that. So what we did, we ended up with some other disillusioned church people. We went and kind of what you hear people do. We went to western Wisconsin, out in the rural community that we were still in today, and we bought a farm with two other couples, and that's how I started to become a farmer. I had never touched a cow in my life. We bought 100 head of cattle, and we started milking cows. And so, it's just a crazy thing. I look back now that I never in a million years would have thought I would have ended up on a farm milking cows. But we did that because we were hungry for God, and we were looking for a way to express our Christianity in a very authentic way, and that's what we did.
I love it. I love it. Now, people are not very familiar with Wisconsin, and to mention some place called Menominee, how far away are you from one of the more major cities?
We are just an hour from Minneapolis-St. Paul. So we're right across the border from Minneapolis-St. Paul in Minnesota. So actually, I grew up in Minnesota, so I'm not very far from my homeland. But western Wisconsin happens to be a very rolling hills and rivers. It's a very beautiful area, but it's not very popular. It's
beautiful. It is a very very beautiful place there. Yeah. And if you ever, just a quick little side note, listeners, if you're one of those folks that likes to go on a road trip or get in the RV and you just want to roll out and see the beautiful land that God has created, the Midwest is absolutely beautiful, and Wisconsin is definitely one of those places. What is one of your first experiences when it comes to church that has affected you positively and negatively? Do you have a story for both?
Well, positively, yeah. The church I mentioned that I said it was one of the fastest growing churches in the United States. Because I grew up in a Catholic background that was very traditional and very ritualistic, I had no idea that church could be exciting, it could be fun, it could be stimulating, all those positive things. So when I walked into that church, it was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. The pastor preached the Bible, and he taught it in a way that I understood, and in a way that was relevant. And so we were taking this ancient text, and he's telling me how it's relevant to how I live my life today, how I can know God, how I can relate to other people. So, that first church experience, in fact, the church that I started, the church that I pastor today, I always tip my hat to that very first church and say the reason our church is, exciting and relevant and all the things I just mentioned are because I saw that church could be that way. And I wanted at that time, I never even dreamed that I'd be a pastor, but now that I am a pastor, it's like, yes, that's the reason our church is the way it is today is because of that first church experience that was very positive. So you said negative side. On the negative side, I think, especially I noticed that when I went to that smaller church plant, the pastor became a little paranoid and became controlling, and just that whole controlling, suddenly the freedom of just being led by God wasn't there anymore, and there's that sense of you had to please this pastor and you had to jump through hoops, and this isn't what I signed up for. And so that's actually what maybe we'll probably talk about later, but that was kind of a foundational experience that I had to help me to think about writing a book about spiritual abuse.
And I'm so glad that you put that out there, that there is a such thing as spiritual abuse, and you don't have to stay in any type of abusive situation, even if it's not a physical, someone's not being physically abusive to you, if they're being spiritually abusive to you, that is not what God wants for us. And most definitely we can touch on that, because there's someone there, a listener saying, what? That exists? Just like there's someone who's going, yes, I think that's me.
Right.
Yeah, can we definitely talk about that a little bit more? And I'm so glad that when you were talking about the church that really made a difference, one of the things that I talked about when I moved to Long Beach, California initially, and I called my mother and I said, I found a church that I really like. I said, but the thing about this church is that I didn't have to convince any of my family members to want to go back. We all agreed that there was so much love and there was so much acceptance, and everyone was so welcoming. And like you said, the word was presented in a way that was very appealing to you, that you felt like you were being spiritually fed. And that really and truly, I think, makes a difference. And it makes a profound difference on whether or not we get involved in church a little bit more.
Yeah.
Because you want more of that.
Yeah, I was just telling my congregation in my message yesterday, I said, that Jesus, in the early part of the book of John, it says he told some of his disciples to come and see, to come see, come follow. And I told my congregation, I said, we worked really, really hard at this church to make it a come and see church, a church where there are no obstacles to just simply come and see what this Jesus thing is all about. So we don't pressure people for money, and we don't pressure people to be a volunteer, and we don't pressure people even to live a certain moral code. On the front end, because a lot of people we want them to come and see and to check Jesus out. And once they make a decision, once they make a decision to follow Christ, then we're going to say, okay, this is the way of Jesus, and yes, there is a moral code, and yes, there is some involvement that is required. But on the front end, like you said, the church that you went to, it's very accepting, and there's not this sense of, I've got to conform to in order to come and see, I've got to conform to who they want me to be. That really scares people away.
It does. It really does. And I think that if we could find that, for those that may be looking for a church home, one of the things that they want to know is that I'm okay, and Jesus really is going to love me like how I am. Like my friend or someone told me that God loves me just as I am. Well, I'm going to choose this particular church today, and let's see if God is really going to love me. And what they mean is, these people that say that they're Christians, that they're following Christ, are they really going to be accepting of me? Are they really going to have, room for me? And I'm telling you, it makes a world of difference. It really makes you feel like you want to be a part of this church family, and that you do want more of this Jesus that people have been talking about.
Yeah.
Now, before we go to a break, I want to make sure that everyone is able to find you on the internet. So if you would, please, can you remind everyone, where are you on the World Wide Web?
Okay, well, my name is Remy, which is R-E-M-Y, and my website is simply Reading Remy. Reading Remy. So reading, the word reading, like reading a book, readingremy.com.
Alrighty, listeners, we need to take a very short break, but when we get back, we're going to continue talking from farmer to shepherd. We'll be back right after this. And we are back. Thank you so much for joining me for Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I'm your host, Dr. Angela Chester. So today we are talking about the various experiences that we have, not only in church, but the experiences that we have as a church. And today we're talking farmer to shepherd and all of the in-between that comes along with that. So, Remy, you were asking, or you were talking about the way in which you've experienced church or not experienced church, or, the way that it has made an impression on you. So what made you decide to give up on church and move to a farm community?
Yeah. Well, the first shift I made, I was a part of this very large church, and it became what I considered too commercial. When it just, everything suddenly seemed it was more about the marketing campaign than it was what the move of the Holy Spirit was. So that just troubled me. So when someone started a church, a small church, out of the larger church, I thought, maybe if I was a part of a smaller church, that's going to bring me back to a little more authentic, organic experience that I was looking for. So I did that, and that, like I mentioned before, that's where I got to cut my teeth on ministry. So I got to start preaching there, and I got to lead some small groups there, and I got to conference there. So that was good for me as far as helping me to get started down the path of ministry. But unfortunately, with the pastor that I worked with, he became, I'm not quite sure what happened, but he felt threatened, he felt paranoid, and he started to get controlling. In fact, the last thing that kind of put me over the edge, he had a couple visions that he called them, where one of them was where a storm was going to hit the church, and if you left the church, bad things would happen to you. And
wow.
Oh, this is not good. So I confronted him on it, and he was like, hey, if you can't agree with me, then you just need to leave. And so I said, well, I'm sorry, but then you put me in an untenable situation. Those are the only two choices I had, then I have to leave. So I left. And that was too devastating for me. So I tried the big church, tried the small church, and I was like, God, I don't really know what to do. Maybe church is just broken. Maybe there's something wrong with, the way that humans have handled it, and maybe it's not what it used to be. And so we had stayed out of church actually for about, I would say about 5 years. And then as a part of that, as a kind of a compromise, we had a couple other friends of ours, two couples, and we said, why don't we, because we're all disillusioned with this church thing, why don't we move together and live in community and maybe have like just a house meeting and see if that works. And so the idea was to simply live in community. And I said, I don't really care how we do this, where we do this. I just really want to do this. I felt like that was the right thing to do. And the other two couples thought it would be great to buy a farm. And I was like, okay, that'll be interesting. You can work on. At the time I was a marketing director. I said, you can work on the farm, and I will work in my business, and on the weekends I might chop some wood or something. Well, what happened is I got laid off of my job, and one of the couples moved away from the farm. And so the way it worked out is we wanted to let the farm experience continue. I had to work on the farm. So here, this city kid who says, I'm willing to do anything to make this work. And so I learned how to milk cows, and I learned how to drive a tractor, and I learned how to bring in the hay, harvest hay, and all those kind of things. And it was an experience. It was that's my backside of the wilderness, Moses, the thing that Moses did. That was my wilderness experience, and it was very tough. It was very hard. I did that for 7 years, but it was also a time of really testing and proving me as well.
And I wanted to, and it's so interesting that you said that, because I wanted to ask you that question. How did it ultimately play out for you? And what I mean by that is even though you were changing what you were doing as far as kind of like a career, you went from, the corporate job to the farming, but on a spiritual level, how did you transition during that time? Did you find that it was easy for you to be in this better place, or to be mentally in a better place because you had changed literally what you were doing in the past?
Yeah, it was a real mixed bag. I mean, it was exciting because we were starting from scratch and building something from scratch, and we had a vision to have, like I said, kind of this home church experience. So, and I'm a visionary at heart. I always think better than it's going to be. So I had that vision in mind, but the reality was things just were not working out. I thought we'd be spending a lot of time with my coworkers there. There was so much work to do. It was like in the beginning of the day, it was like, you go do this, I'll do this, and maybe we'll see each other. And oftentimes we won't see each other until like the end of the week because we were just busy working, getting it done.
Wow, yeah.
And so it wasn't that the idyllic thing that I thought it was going to be. And relationally, it got really tough. We started to see things in each other that our partners that weren't very healthy either. And so some of the relational dynamics weren't very healthy. We weren't going to church at all because we had given up on church, and frankly, we didn't have time for church. We didn't have time for anything outside of that. And so there was a real dark side to my experience. A lot of things went south on me. Like I probably reached a low point with my marriage during that time because I was so busy. My wife felt abandoned, and I wasn't able to spend time with my kids during that time. I wasn't successful. I was used to being a successful business person, and now here I'm my teeth on this whole new world of hard work and labor, which I wasn't very good at. And honestly, I think I caused a few cows to die because of my.
Oh no!
So it was, I've given a message where I kind of lay all this stuff out, and I said, everything in my world was turning up. If you were grading it, it was a D or an F, and that was very humbling for me. So that's on a spiritual level. I think God took me down to the very, very basics and said, Remy, how does it feel to what it's like to be successful in business and in life. How does it feel to not be successful? How you feel? And it was good. It was fun, formational for me spiritually.
It is. That is definitely an experience. And like you said, you're so used to being successful, and now you're dealing with this whole other dynamic, and and especially farming. I cannot imagine just deciding I'm going to go farm. People think that that's really easy. I have a garden, and I know that just gardening is not as easy as people think it is. So I could imagine trying to tend to a whole farm. Yeah. So you decided that we're staying in community. We're doing all of this, but now you're kind of shifting your gears a little bit, and you're getting into the ministry aspect of it. Was there a particular moment, a particular thing that happened that turned you and said, it is now time to focus on ministry?
Yeah, there really was. It was one of those moments I can remember exactly where I was. I can remember where the sun was and the whole setting, but I was just reflecting deeply on our situation and kind of asking God, so where is this headed? Because it just didn't seem to be going, it wasn't the romantic, idyllic dream that I had imagined. And I was like, God, if that's what you want from me, I want to submit and be humble and do what you want me to do. And I guess I thought I was going to always end up in ministry someday, but if this is what you want, if somehow you're gonna do something good through this experience, I'm game for that. But as I thought about it more and more, I just thought, Remy, you are so isolated right now. I mean, you're not a part of the church. You're not a part of the local community. You're not even a part of the people's lives whom you live with here on this farm. So it seems like things are going the wrong direction. And as I thought about that more, I thought, if I feel called to minister, it seems like you should be where people are. And I'm not, you can't even minister. You got no one to minister. The only people, not even people, the only objects I'm with are cows. Those are the only ones. And they need my help, but, I can't minister to them other than, feeding them. So as I thought about that, I thought, and I just felt like God was asking me, Remy, as much as you dislike church, as much as you feel let down and disillusioned with church, would you be willing to go there? Because that's where the people are. Because that's where my people are. If you want to minister, you got to go where the people are. Would you be willing to go back into the church to minister to those people? It hit me like a ton of bricks. It was like, I thought I left the church out of obedience. I really did, because I thought it was toxic. It wasn't a good situation. And now I was trying to start something new and fresh and real. But it didn't work. And so I had to say, okay, God, I'll go anywhere. I'll go to a farm, and I'll even go back into the church that I'm not too excited about, but I will go back into the church. So that's what I did. There was a church in town that we became a part of, not because I was especially excited about it, but that's we had met some Christians from that church, and we thought, let's just go there. Let's give this a try, and let's be a part of the solution instead of part of the problem. Let's try to be a good influence. If Remy, if you think the church is so bad, why don't you go and see what you can do to make it better? And that that seemed like a really positive move to me.
And it only makes sense to a lot of people, because we say that, if you think something is broken, fix it. Don't wait for someone else to do it. You be the person to do it. And that is so wonderful. And it sounds like God, put you in that place to be able to make that conclusion and to complete this path, that he definitely has for you. So then you're out there, you're talking to the cows, God gives you this epiphany, and listen, we all talk to stuff. People will talk to the birds that they see out there. Being a counselor, I hear, all kinds of stories. It's like, there's a little squirrel I follow on Saturdays, and it is wonderful. It just frees our mind. So now you are going to the local church. You have this understanding that perhaps I need to be the change, that I need to be the one who goes on and steps out and does this change. How far, or how long did it take? Not how far. How long did it take from the moment that you had that understanding to actually starting your own church?
Not very long, really. So I went to this church, and then they asked me, they found out that I had done some teaching in the past, so they asked me to teach a Bible class, and I did. And it was really interesting to me because people were really profoundly affected by my teaching, and I saw in myself that something profound had happened inside of me that I could, I was teaching at a totally different level. I was really teaching out of a sense of brokenness that was reaching people in a much more powerful way than it had ever had before. So I went, wow, wait a minute, something's going on here. God has done something in my life over these years. It felt like he was stripping me, but I think as he was stripping me, he was also adding something to me. So after I did that teaching, that church said, maybe we should invite this guy to be on staff. So that got me into ministry again. And then they invited me to be first part-time and then full-time ministry as an associate pastor. And I was on staff for maybe 2 or 3 years when I got the idea to, along with a couple of my associate pastors here, to start another church. We said, we're in a traditional church. There's no contemporary church in town. What do you think it would be like if we started a contemporary church in this town? It's a town of just 15,000 people. It's a college town in western Wisconsin. And we just thought, that would be exciting. So we brought the idea up to the church elders, and they said they didn't actually think it was a very good idea. But I said, well, how about if we start by just doing a Saturday night alternative? We just, it's going to be contemporary music. It's going to be everything about that service is going to be different. And they said, well, you can do that. So we did that, and it was hugely successful. And then we did that for a couple of years. And then after a couple of years, I said, I think people are looking for a church. Could I start a second church here in town? And again, that was just, we kind of had to fight through that, but eventually they agreed to it. And then just before we started that church, they said, we're changing our mind. We're afraid that if you start a church, our current church is going to split, and then no one's going to be happy. And I went, oh. So it was a huge disappointment, but I said, okay, look, I've got another friend just down the road in a large church down the road who would like to start a church here in town. Would you mind if I worked with him? And they said, actually, that would be great. And that way you can do what you want to do, and we don't have to worry about our church splitting. God bless you, go do that. So that's what I did. So in 2003, we started our church here, Cedarbrook Church, in the same town, across the town from the church that I was working at.
I love the fact that everyone was, though a little bit uncomfortable, there was still wisdom in the moment of you understanding and being flexible and being able to compromise and understand that it was something bigger happening, and just working through that process, that at the right time, it was the right time.
Yeah.
As opposed, instead of splitting up the church, just being patient. So definitely, thank you for moving the way that you were supposed to move, because then that would have been a bad story for for the people in the city.
It turned out well. You know, it was very stressful. I mean, I won't lie about that. It was stressful because we wanted different things, and there was a lot of fear on their part, and there was a lot of frustration on my part. They, come on, let me do this. Why are you being so resistant? But eventually we worked it through, and so we started, and that church has continued to be successful, and we've been very successful as well. So the church that I was at there was a church of probably 400, and now we're a church of maybe 600 or 700. So, I mean, totally combined, the two churches now are well over 1,000. So that's
It really is. It turned out to be success for everyone. Well, listeners, we need to take a very short break, but don't worry, we'll be back in a few moments. We'll be back right after this. And we are back. Thank you for joining me for Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I'm your host, Dr. Angela Chester. We are talking from farmer to shepherd. That's right, the various stages that we go through when God is teaching us, leading us, and we are walking in our purpose. So, Remy, you were talking about how there was this very wonderful work of wisdom with you as an associate pastor with the church, and how your understanding and being patient and allowing God to just really work through that, to then putting you in a position to start your own church, and that too being a success. We know the end result because we know that you are the pastor, but can you tell us a little bit more about, just in case there's someone who's saying, I'm thinking about stepping out and starting my own church, or I'm the pastor of a very young church and I could use some pointers. Is there any advice? How did you become a successful church? Is there any advice or anything that you can share when it comes to that?
Well, I think part of the success really came from the farm experience as far as the stripping that took place. I think the reason I had to stop, I'm 60 years old now. I started the church, I was in my late 40s. And a lot of times when I go to church planter events, they're full of 28, 29, 30-year-old guys. And at the time that I was planning our church, I felt like maybe I'm too old for this. Maybe church planting is just for the young guys. But I think I had to take a detour that maybe some others don't, just because I think I was just too proud. I thought I was too full of myself, and I thought I could do anything. And I think God had to strip that out of me. And so coming to the church planning, I think it was very helpful that God had dealt with a lot of that, because then I think we were all very conscious of God doing a special work here and raising this up from nothing, and not because Remy was necessarily so wonderful at anything, but just God wanted to make this happen. So it was there's always been a strong sense that God is in this, and God is bringing people together. We also hit it at the time, the season of history, of church history, that in this town there was no contemporary church. And so a lot of people had, in rural areas, at least in our rural area, I think we're often 10 years behind. And so people, if you live here in this town, but you have relatives or friends in other cities, and you might visit other churches, and you go, oh, that church is amazing, but you come back to your town with all the kind of old line traditional. So there's this pent up wanting or longing for something different. And so when we started, immediately we started with 200 people, and within a month we went to 2 services, and then we're at 300 people. So that's very unusual for a small town like this, to be able to have a church start at 200 and go immediately.
Right.
But I think as far as what does it make it successful, a lot of it had to do, like I said, this pent-up longing for something that was new and accepting, and not so old-fashioned.
And it's so wonderful that you were able to tap into that you not only had a positive experience yourself, and you knew what church was supposed to feel like, but you listened to the wisdom that you were given and said, there's nothing wrong with this, traditional way, and that's great for the people who want the traditional way, but the contemporary way can also be available for the people who want to have this type of experience. And it'll get them fired up, you know. And it's about that. Yeah.
We've never positioned our church as good and traditional as bad. We've always positioned ourselves as, no, we're just different. We're an option. Like, so thank you for clarifying there, because I don't want to say anything that the traditional church is bad. It's just something that it didn't relate to me. It wasn't relevant for me because I didn't grow up in the church. And so for a lot of people, there are a lot of people like me who said, you know, traditional church isn't bad, but it's not speaking to me. It's not helping me to hear the words of God in my life. And so, so we offered the city an alternative, and now people take advantage of that. And I think because of my bad church experience, especially in the early days, I would often talk about who we don't want to be, and people could resonate with it. We've always said that we're a church for people who have given up on church, but not on God. And that phrase resonated with a lot of people because they said, "Oh, you know, that's who I am. I haven't given up on God. I believe in God. I just, for whatever reason, you know, there's lots of bad stories out there. They had given up on church, and for whatever reason as well, they were willing to try one more time at our church. And I've always been thankful. Like, really, after all the bad experiences you've had, you're willing to try this again? How are you doing? That's great.
And it's so true. There are so many stories about people just the church did this, and you know, we even hear it in jokes every now and again, and it's like, you know, those church folk, you know, and it's like that's so sad because you don't want those stories to represent all of Christianity, because you have so many people that want you to have this truly intimate, loving, kind relationship with God, and just be able to say, hey, he can be that best friend. He can be that whatever it is that you've been longing for, you know, that person for you. He can definitely be that, and to be able to kind of bring it back full circle and say it's out there, and we can help you tap into that side. So I want to kind of shift gears just a little bit, because I want to talk about your author personality. You have 6 books.
Right.
And I know we don't have time to talk about all of them, but if you could you tell me a little bit about your 6 books, and how did you decide to write those 6? Yeah,
that's, you know, it's kind of like pastoring. I never, if you would ask me in college if you're going to be a pastor, I'd say you're crazy. You know, and if you're going to be a farmer, I'd say, well, now you're really crazy. You know, well, how about author? Are you going to be an author? It's like, what are you smoking? I mean,
what are you doing?
How are you asking me these strange questions? Because I would never be any of those things. And so here I am all these years later, and I'm all these things. Well, what happened is, when I was a pastor, earlier on in this other church that I left before I started our current church, there was a treatment center, an addiction treatment center just a couple doors away, and they needed someone to come in and do spirituality groups. And so I volunteered for that, and so I've been doing that for over 20 years now. But what I did is I developed some curriculums to teach them, and they were quite successful and very well liked. And then I thought, well, this will help. One was on shame, how to help people find their identity through faith in God. And then the other was how to overcome anger through forgiveness. And so I taught these over and over for year after year after year, and I finally pulled them together into like a booklet. And then I had a friend who was starting his own self-publishing company. He said, you know, Remy, I just need some authors that I can publish their books. You know, I got everything set up. I just need some authors. And I said, well, I've got a couple manuscripts that I wanted to turn into a book, but I don't have time to chase down an agent and all that kind of stuff. So if you just want to publish them just to practice, you know, knock yourself out, feel free to do that. So he published them both, and to my shock, you know, they were highly rated, and people really liked them. And I'd get emails, people telling me that they changed their life so much. I'm going, who knew? You know, who knew? And so, and then I have kind of through other teachings that I've had, I came up with the other one. I wrote a book. Initially, it was for pastors. I wrote a book called Out of Exile, combining some of my teachings that I taught at the treatment center, but helping them to deal with their losses in life. Because I think pastors so often don't have anyone to turn to. And then they often will minimize it by saying, well, they'll quote some Bible verse or something, and they'll act like it's not a big deal, when it's really a big deal. And so they go through life with these big hurts that are never dealt with, and that's what I call exile. I said, well, when you have losses and you don't know what to do with them, that's an exile. You're emotionally in an exile. And so I wrote a book that talked about what can you learn in your exile, and drawing a lot from my experience in the farm. And then how do you get out of exile? What are some practical things you can do to get your life back on track so you don't have this open wound all the time? So that was called Out of Exile. That was written for pastors. And then I rewrote the whole thing for the average person, and I called it Return from Exile. So just helping people recover from their losses. So those are my first 4 books, and then I just wrote a very short book on forgiveness called Starting Over, and then the one I just released a couple weeks ago is called Broken Trust. And Broken Trust, is the subtitle for that is called a practical guide to identify and recover from toxic faith, toxic church, and spiritual abuse. And that's drawing upon my experience from those early churches that I was a part of.
And I think it's something that really needs to be addressed, because there are far too many people that have a story about how church has hurt them.
It's crazy.
It is just mind blowing, and then people have these conversations about, well, how do we attract people to church, or we can't seem to keep people here at the church.
Right.
And it's, well, what are you doing? What is the spirit of your church? What is the atmosphere of your church? How are church members speaking to other church members? Are you really displaying the love of Christ at your church, or is everyone kind of caught up in their own little who's on what committee or board, or who are you related to, and all of those secular things that we kind of on or lean on to determine whether or not someone is okay. So just in case there's someone who came in a little bit later to it, Broken Trust, I know you said that is the newest book that you have. Can you give us an example, because we're almost out of time? What does it mean to have toxic faith, toxic church, and spiritual abuse? What do those things mean to you?
When I think of toxic faith, I think of legalism, like religious legalism, where you've got to do this to be accepted in God's eyes. And a lot of times in churches, sometimes it's overt, sometimes it's very subtle, but there's this message that is spoken or implied, even just through raised eyebrows sometimes, like, hey, if you don't do what we want you to do, you're not really okay with God. And
right.
So it might seem like it's not a big deal at first, like, well, they just said this or just said that. But when when a pattern develops where people are trying to control your behavior and tell you where you stand with God, when they really don't know, it becomes abusive in the sense that they're trying to manipulate your behavior. So that's in a nutshell what those 3 things we're talking about.
I think that book is definitely going to be a bestseller, because people really and truly want to address it. They want to know, well, what can I do about it? I still want to have this relationship with God, but I just don't know if I can trust the church again. And how do I move past my hurt and still be able to go to a church and feel safe with just my life, whatever that means, to the various people out there. How do I just be and make sure that I am really and truly okay? Well, Pastor Remy Diederich, and I mess this up every time. Diederich, is that correct? Am I saying that correctly?
That's cool. No, Diederich. Right.
Okay, Diederich, thank you so much. Thank you so much for spending time with me. I really and truly appreciate that. And I want to make sure that everyone can find you online. So one more time, if you would please, can you share with us, where can folks find you on the internet?
You can find me at readingremy.com. Reading like you're reading a book, and Remy is R-E-M-Y. So readingremy.com.
And, if someone happens to be in your area, what time are your church services? They may want to stop by.
Yeah, we're at 9 and 10:30 on Sunday mornings, and we're right off Highway 94 here, just like I said before, just east of Minneapolis-St. Paul.
All righty. Thank you, Pastor. Thank you so much for spending time with me today.
Thank you, Dr. Angela.
And listeners, thank you for joining me for Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I hope that today's show has inspired you, that it has enlightened you, and it has empowered you. And as always, may God continue to shine His grace, His mercy upon you. And until next time, remember that you are the head and not the tail, and that you are blessed and highly favored. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.